investigating the two murders of Mary Morris. Over the course of 5 days, two different women by the name of Mary Morris were reported missing and later found murdered in the same city. And because of this, it led to the suspicion that a hitman had been involved, but perhaps had made a mistake. So, before I jump fully into this story, some quick housekeeping. First, as always, I will list 3 cases that I have interest in covering, and I need your help. So please comment down below with your vote so I can cover the case that is the most voted for sooner than later. And second and final request, if you enjoy the content that you hear today, and if you have not already done so, I would be grateful for you to subscribe if you feel so inclined to do so. But enough of the housekeeping, let's get into this true crime tale. In the early 21st century, Houston, Texas, in the United States, had a population that was teetering on the edge of 2 million people, which is a figure that is surpassed today. When you have cities with populations as large as Houston, it's not uncommon for people to either have similar names or the same name, especially when you have a name as common as Mary. But for 2 people who shared the name of Mary Morris, their destinies would become inextricably entwined. On the 12th of October of the year 2000, the body of 48-year-old bank loan officer Mary Henderson Morris was found burned in her car. 5 days later, the body of 39-year-old nurse Mary McGinnis Morris was also found dead in her car just 25 miles away from where Mary Henderson Morris had been found dead. The difference was that while Mary Henderson Morris had been found burned in her car, Mary McGinnis Morris had been both beaten and shot in the head. Now, on first glance, this seemed to be an unfortunate circumstance that both of these women happened to have the same name, because overall, these murders were vastly different. The only obvious similarity was, of course, their names and their bodies being found in their respective vehicles, but that was really it. And as time passed, investigators investigators really were at a loss due to the lack of evidence present. But as mentioned in the beginning, theories began to circulate around these two deaths, and people started to speculate that perhaps a hitman had been hired to murder, but had made a mistake and killed the wrong Mary Morris on the first round. So let us first talk about Mary Henderson Morris, which was the one that was found burned to death in her car. So at 6 a.m. on the dot on the morning of the 12th of October, Mary Henderson Morris would stick to her usual routine of leaving her Baytown ranch for her job at Chase Bank in central Houston. She was known to be precise and very much stuck to a schedule without fail. Her husband, Jay Morris, would walk her to the car and watched as she drove off on her usual route to work. 4 hours after Mary had left her home, the fire department would receive calls of a fire burning around 3 miles away from Mary's home. And upon the initial investigation of this blaze, there was no connection, pretty understandably so, to Mary Morris. Later that day, Jay, her husband, would make several calls to his wife, with whom he usually would speak to several times throughout the day. But on this day in particular, each time that he called, it would go straight to her voicemail. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, her employer, Chase Bank, would call her home to inquire as to where she was and if she was okay, because she had had this job for 15 years and there had never been a day where she just didn't turn up for work. So her employer was very concerned about her well-being. Understandably so, when Jay Morris gets the phone call from Chase Bank, learning that his wife didn't make it to work, in addition to her not picking up any of the phone calls he had already made throughout the day, he was incredibly worried. And so he would reach out to both the police department and his stepdaughter, Marilyn, and together they would retrace the route that Mary would normally take to work in the hopes of finding her. But unfortunately, they would find no sign of her. In the late afternoon of October 12th, the police would respond to a call of a burnt-out vehicle on a remote road leading into the city, and inside of the car was Mary's body. She had been so badly burned that it was not easy by any means, essentially impossible to determine who was in the vehicle just by looking at the body. But it was reasonable to assume that it was Mary because the car was registered to her, and eventually they would determine the identification through dental records. Police would note that both Mary's purse and wedding ring were missing, but other pieces of jewelry were basically still on her body but had melted into her body due to the heat of the blaze. Immediately, this case was treated as a homicide investigation due to the intensity of the fire and the suspicion that the vehicle and body both had been soaked in gasoline to be used as an accelerant. Now, as is pretty typical, the police would investigate further into Mary's life. They wanted to know who she was, what she was into, what people thought of her, right? Because they wanted to try and paint a picture and fit these puzzle pieces together to understand if there was anybody out there that would want to cause her this level of harm. But what they found out upon investigation is that there was not a single person that they could find that had a bad thing to say about her. She was well liked. She was hardworking at her job. She was sociable and had a solid social circle, and really just had no enemies whatsoever to speak of. Also, as is normal, her husband Jay and her ex-husband were both initially looked at as suspects, but very quickly they were proven to not be suspects in the case because they had solid alibis. Very eerily, on the following day, which was the 13th of October, the news team at the Houston Chronicle received a phone call from an unidentified man. And this man would say, quote, "They got the wrong Mary Morris," end quote. Nobody really knew why this was said or what this meant at the time. But 3 days later, these words would come back to haunt them and finally perhaps start to make sense. On October 16th, 4 days after Mary Henderson Morris had been killed, police would respond yet again to reports of a dead body found in another vehicle. On another remote road, 25 miles from where Mary Henderson Morris had been found dead, they would find a Dodge Intrepid on the side of the road. And inside the vehicle was the body of Mary McGinnis Morris, who had been beaten and shot dead the evening before. Her passenger side door was open, and her wedding ring had been removed, but other personal belongings were found in the vehicle. Now, the murder weapon for Mary McGinnis Morris was a gun that actually belonged to Mary's husband, Mike Morris, which Mary kept in the vehicle, which it sounds like she did for safety purposes. And to the police, it seemed that someone had attempted to make this murder look like a suicide, but evidence at the crime scene and a phone call from the prior evening confirmed to the police that this, in fact, was another homicide. That phone call that police would reference was to one of Mary's close friends, and she made this call while she was parked outside of a convenience store. On the phone call, she would tell her friend that she was out running errands, but somebody was watching her and she was getting very creeped out by it. 10 minutes later, after that phone call, Mary would use the very same phone to call the police. The contents of that 911 call have actually never been released to the public, but it is implied and assumed that this call may involve Mary calling the police for help because she was being attacked. When an investigation was carried out on her body, the pathologist found torn clothing, bruising, and markers pointing to Mary being gagged at some point. So whomever had suggested that this may have been a suicide was clearly way off the mark, which there is no judgment in that statement. You wouldn't know any of that right off the bat. And so after they go and do this more digging and investigation, these police find themselves diving deep into the two deaths of two women named Mary Morris. The funeral for Mary Henderson Morris would take place the same day the body of Mary McGinnis's body was discovered. After the funeral, Mary Henderson Morris's daughter, Marilyn, called the medical examiner's office to claim her mother's jewelry. The coroner on duty told Marilyn that the items would be ready at the same time as the body. Now, Marilyn was shocked by this because they had just had the funeral, but the coroner was insistent they still had the body of Mary Henderson Morris. And it was in that moment that the family of Mary Henderson Morris began to realize that something was amiss. Now again, other than their names and the fact that they were both found dead in their vehicles, there really did not seem to be a solid link between these two Marys. They did not know each other, and they had never crossed paths as far as they could tell. However, both women were married. They looked remarkably similar, and each had one daughter. The investigation into Mary Henderson Morris's death stalled quickly as there was really no evidence to go on, and any leads that they had were coming to a dead end pretty quickly. But the Mary McGinnis Morris murder would offer up two suspects. The first was Dwayne Young, a co-worker at the clinic she worked at as a nurse, who was known to have a bad working relationship with her. It is reported that Dwayne was the reason that Mary would carry her husband's gun in the car with her for safety. And Dwayne has remained a suspect ever since, but there was no evidence beyond circumstantial evidence to suggest that he was responsible for her murder. But Mary's husband, Mike, on the other hand, had a clear motive. Mike Morris was known to be jealous of his wife and had on occasion followed her to work to see what she was up to. He was very distrusting, and when he found out about his wife's death, he would refuse to talk to police without an attorney and refused to take a polygraph or a lie detector test. But apparently this is generally considered normal based off what I've researched, but I'm not so sure I agree with that. I personally am more inclined to understand the attorney part if you're not guilty, not so much refusing to take a polygraph, but that is just my personal opinion. Mike would also refuse to allow his daughter Katie to be questioned by the police, which would raise suspicions for them as well. But ultimately, Mike and Katie had an alibi of being at the movie theater at the time of Mary's murder. There was also the little matter that Mike had recently taken out a life insurance policy on Mary for just over $500,000. It's not the first time we've heard that, right? But without solid evidence of either Mike or Katie's involvement, there really wasn't much police could do about this, even though it looked very suspicious. Many months would go by and they did not make any progress. Mike would host a dinner party at his home with some friends when they noticed that Katie was wearing her mother's wedding ring. Now remember, the wedding rings from both the crime scenes of both Mary Morris's supposedly disappeared from the crime scene. So why was Katie wearing it? But Mike would quickly claim that he had later on found her ring Mary Morris by mistake and had to make the second murderer, who was the initial intended target, look like an altogether different style of murder, so they would not be connected. The wedding ring may have been returned to Mike as proof the job had been executed, and this theory was bolstered by that phone call received at the Houston Chronicle from someone claiming that the wrong Mary Morris had been killed. 5 months after the murders, Mary Henderson Morris's husband, Jay, would receive a $2,000 phone bill from the phone that had been in Mary's bag, and police would trace it to a 16-year-old girl 50 miles away in Galveston, Texas. She would claim to have found the phone in an abandoned purse at a shopping mall parking lot. So the police start to think maybe somehow this 16-year-old girl is involved. But she was quickly cleared of any link to the murder. But when the purse was returned to Jay Morris, he would tell police that it did not belong to his wife. With regard to the Mary Henderson murder, police concluded that whoever killed her really took a great deal of time to seclude her in that area, and someone went to the trouble to make sure there was absolutely no evidence left. The investigation found no connection between the two Marys, aside from this hitman theory, which has perpetuated online. The family of Mary Henderson Morris believes the two murders are not a coincidence, and they continue to raise awareness for both Mary's deaths. So one of the questions that comes up is if the murder of Mary McGinnis Morris was not premeditated and not a robbery, how would the killer have known there would be a gun in the car? Though Mike Morris has been accused of orchestrating his wife's murder, he has maintained his innocence. In addition, people go back to the thought of Dwayne, Mary's co-worker, and question why she was so afraid of him that she wanted to keep her husband's gun in her car. Was it Dwayne that she had seen that night following her? Was it an unknown killer? Was it a hitman lurking in the shadows? The police never found out. Despite lengthy investigations and an untold number of cold case researchers looking at the files of both of these homicides, any evidence from either crime scene is unfortunately minimal at best, and both murders of Mary Morris remain unsolved to this day. So that will conclude our case of the murders of Mary Morris times 2. I am sure you guys, if you have been with me for a while, could guess that I 1000% do not think this is a coincidence. This is just too freaky for two women by the same name to be murdered in the same city just a few days apart, and to be both found dead in their vehicle, especially that they had, fairly similar physical appearances. They both had one daughter. There's too much that's similar between the two, and from my perspective, if you are a hitman trying to track down this woman to murder, I can see why the wrong Mary Morris was murdered first. But that's just me. And the fact that Mike Morris was such a jealous husband and took out a $500,000 life insurance policy, that's pretty sketchy and does not sit well with me. Please let me know what you think of this case. Thank you for your patience on me posting another video after the 13 days of Halloween, and